Welcome to Uplift You. This moment's focus is on developing your own influence. Amy and I share insights on this important topic.
So, Amy, do you want to shed some light on social influence and what that is?
So I've had quite fun with like looking into social influence. I like to dig into the like kind of psychology of how we all behave and what we're doing. So it can feel like, well, it did feel like I was slightly going into a rabbit burrow and going finding lots and lots of different things. Um, but there is a quote that I wanted to share. So we see the world not as it is, but as we are, or as we are conditioned to see it. So that's by Stephen Covey. I think that's like pretty powerful. I think one of the things when you look at social influence, it's quite often invisible for people to see. Like quite often people see that it's happening to everybody else, but not to themselves. And so you think about like not only what we consume, but also like kind of how it plays out kind of in organizations, who we surround ourselves with, like kind of how we kind of get stuff done. A lot of that is down to actual kind of social influence. And it's now like such a key skill that the World Economic Forum has identified as being one of the top 6 skills that is needed for 2025 as well. So leadership and social influence is up there. And they're kind of saying with all of these skills that they've kind of got, like 50% of people will need reskilling by 2025.
Is that because of AI or technology changing? So we're moving into a new era?
So their study was done, I think, a couple of years ago, but they haven't done another one since. And I was just, when we were looking at influence, it was one of the things that kind of popped up. If you think about the changes that have undergone in technology, the decline of certain maybe more administrative like kind of duties that can be automated, there is much more impact in terms of like actually how do we organize teams and organizations themselves, how do we kind of get stuff done, and those skills are now becoming so key. And I think the other thing is that we're moving away from the traditional organization, like in a sense that authority top down, like kind of leadership, like kind of down in a traditional sense, and we're much more kind of looking at kind of how do organizations function as kind of communities, really. I think I certainly have always said the demise of like communities that we live in, religion, like kind of all of those things that have seen declines like kind of over time, have put so much more pressure on organizations like kind of to be that like kind of for individuals. You now see organizations looking at anything kind of from well-being, mental health, like kind of development of individuals. And if you go back however many years ago, it was almost like you come in, task based, we do whatever you need to do, and that was kind of the authoritative like kind of approach to leadership. And that significantly kind of changed, certainly in the last 10-15 years, and I think it's been ever increasing. But now you've got this automation happening. I think it's put so much more emphasis on human skills rather on maybe some of those tactical kind of, or even traditional kind of top down approach as well. Certainly similar things come up to what you were saying about power and influence from a broader perspective. So leadership and social influence are related to concepts that involve affecting behavior of those towards a common goal. Leadership is the process of social influence that maximizes the efforts of others as well, kind of is one of the terms that comes up. And social influence is the ability to leverage key tactics that involve people to connect and inspire others as well. And so you can kind of already see, even from that term, how much we now expect managers and leaders, and even just as like individual kind of contributors, like we're asking people to do those sorts of things all of the time. I think it's really important for all of us to understand we are social beings, and we are so heavily influenced by people and places that shape everything we do. And like I kind of go back to the beginning of it, is that invisible force that we kind of don't think it happens to us. We think it happens to everybody else. The reason why do we run a little bit faster when people are watching? Like, kind of, why do we try a little bit harder? It's like, but it's also referred to like kind of like a magnet, so it can attract like other people. So how can you bring people along with you for those kind of common goals? But it also equally repels. So if you're doing something that people don't want to be associated with, then it also does the opposite of what you, and maybe has quite a deep impact from that aspect as well.
Can you share the next 3 steps we need to be focusing on to improve ourselves by 2025?
I think one of them is for us to understand how other people are motivated. So we would typically communicate or engage with people in a way that we want to be communicated to, which is equally why I kind of go back to our Fraro B stuff. It's why we use a tool like in what we do, like kind of to help people understand themselves and also understand how they come across like kind of to others. But starting to think about like what motivates other people. I think there does tend to be a spectrum, like whether people are more tasked data like orientated, and whether that drives them to understand or engage with certain things, or whether your relationship or teams like kind of based as well. So trying to, I suppose, put yourself in the other person's shoes. And I think the real difficulty that we have, especially as we try and build companies, organizations, teams, is to have some sense of personalization as well. I don't know how you necessarily achieve that, like on the mass, but it kind of comes down to ultimately engaging with people on an individual level and getting to understand really what their needs are and what makes people tick is kind of one of the key things. And like ultimately they're saying like influence is about understanding yourself and the impact you have on others. I think one of the key things organizations need to do, or we need to do as part of our careers, when you think about even the most advanced ways of looking at kind of career development within a company and stuff like that, is still quite focused on what have you done, what will you do next. It's quite task orientated. And our careers actually need to be broader than that. Like kind of, they need to be like, what's the impact that we're having? What direction are we going in? One of the things that I found fascinating about social influence as well is the spectrum of needing to conform, and the spectrum, the other end of it, of difference as well and standing out. And so there's a lot of like kind of background psychology around that, which stems from our upbringing as well. So there is now, when you look at factors relating to EDI and things like that, like social class is kind of coming up as one of those things as well. And that's, I think a lot of that is related to because the behaviors that come out in organizations are quite different. So depending on what we've been told as children, those that might see themselves as having more of a barrier, so those that are more related to a working class background will see the need to conform, like kind of, and not saying that this is one size fits all, but they're just saying that there are trends around that. So you want sameness, you don't want to stand out, whereas those that maybe come from like a non-working class background, or maybe have been wealthy, have always been pushed to be seen as being different. And so when you're kind of told those like kind of points over and over again as a child, that also will change your behavior kind of later on as well. But if we go back to also the point of consistency, there is also a link between influence and exposure. So apparently the more familiar you are leads to more liking as well. That's also quite a fascinating point to think about when the exposure that we have as individuals, the more we can put ourselves in front of people, the more chance we have of influencing them as well.
Some great
So
insight there.
that doesn't necessarily answer all of the questions of how to do it, but,
No.
I think if I was to summarize it, I would say it's understanding yourself, understanding what motivates others, thinking about your own background in terms of, do you like to conform or do you like to stand out? And there will be a spectrum of that. But also, are you in an organization which likes to do one or the other? How do they reward or non-reward, like kind of that? How much exposure do we have as well? How can we put ourselves, which kind of comes back to some of the points that you were also saying. I see it as, it's not just social influence, it's not just power, it's not just, it's kind of all of these things that actually we sometimes have different terminologies for things, but they're actually all telling us quite similar things.
Thanks for listening, and stay tuned for next week's Uplift You podcast. Make sure to hit that subscribe button.